Israel's genocide against the Palestinian people has been facilitated from day one by the Western media. They legitimised Israel's genocidal onslaught. It raised the incessantly stated in public genocidal intent of Israeli leaders and officials, whitewashed Israeli atrocities, on endless occasions refused to even cover atrocities committed by the Israeli state, dehumanised Palestinians, failed to accurately represent the full horror of what's been unleashed by the Israeli state against Gaza and beyond, failed to interrogate the complicity of Western governments. We really could go on. This latest horror underlines this outright racism and complicity in genocide, and we should have no hesitation in saying any of these things. In the early hours of this morning, the Israeli state attacked a hospital in Deir el-Balah in the centre of Gaza. Here, many displaced Palestinians were sheltering in tents. The result: multiple Palestinian civilians burned to death. The footage I have watched is as nightmarish as it is possible to get, and will stay with me forever. It shows Palestinian civilians connected to intravenous drips in hospital beds, burning to death. You see one writhing. One of them is clearly a child, an injured child who was sleeping in their bed, connected to an IV drip at what was supposed to be a place of safety, a hospital. And then an Israeli missile explodes and they are burned to death. You can see Palestinians who are unable to reach them, screaming, overwhelmed with unimaginable mental agony. A little thought experiment. If a Hamas or Hezbollah rocket hit an Israeli hospital and there was footage of Israeli children attached to IV drips being burned alive, what sort of media coverage do you think that would get? Be realistic, be honest. I think you know the answer. There was another atrocity, there are endless atrocities committed every single day by the Israeli state. In this case, a school full of displaced sleeping Palestinians in Nuseirat, central Gaza, hit by an Israeli attack, with multiple women and children being amongst the at least 32 killed. But that hospital strike, for example, did not lead the news. Let me just start with Sky News. Look at their website, their headline: Israel names teenage soldiers killed in Hezbollah drone strike as, and then inverted quotes, 23 die, that's in inverted quotes, in Gaza school strike. Here you have the anti-Palestinian racism of the British media in all its absurdity and moral depravity captured in a single headline. After a Hezbollah missile hit an Israeli military base, you get 4 19-year-old Israeli soldiers who were killed, who were humanised by Sky News, an emphasis on characteristics to engender senses of sympathy, of grief. Teenage soldiers. The perpetrator, that is the force responsible for killing them, was named. By contrast, 23 Palestinian civilians are killed, many of them actual children. Their deaths put in scare quotes as if to sow doubt. Who they were not described, the perpetrator Israel not named. Now let's see this clip from Sky News this morning.
And the 4 soldiers that have died have now been named. All of them were just 19 years old. They are Sergeant Omri Tamari. In addition to that, Sergeant Yosef Hieb, Sergeant Yoav Agmon, and Sergeant Alon Amite. As I said, all 4 of them just 19 years old.
Incredible stuff. Sky News dedicates airtime to these 4 Israeli soldiers with a profoundly mournful tone. They were just 19 years old, we were told twice. Do you remember Sky News doing this for any of the tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians? That is non-combatants who've been slaughtered. Was there this attempt to humanise actual children who aren't engaged in armed conflict? Would Sky News do such a roll call for another army engaged in rampant war crimes? I mean, they wouldn't do this for Hamas fighters, would they? I mean, even just saying that would provoke shock and outrage for some, but I'm not asking Sky News to do that. I'm aware of the war crimes committed by Hamas. So do explain to me what rules are being applied here. It gets worse, so much worse. Sky News employ so-called military analysts. Let's listen to this example from earlier this year.
This happened at the border checkpoint. You can see a car going through and ramming some of the police that were actually manning that checkpoint. The video we're going to freeze shortly, but The two people, a man and a woman in the car. Subsequently, they were killed by the police, but it looks like accidentally a stray bullet found its way into the van ahead, and that killed a 3 or 4 year old young lady. So tragic events in the West Bank.
So we have 4 19-year-old Israeli soldiers who are mournfully described as teenagers, as just 19 years old. But in this case, we have a military analyst paid for on Sky News, uncorrected, describing a 3-year-old Palestinian little girl being killed by the Israeli army as a young lady. And then he describes her death as follows, but it looks like accidentally a stray bullet found its way into the van ahead, and that killed a 3 or 4 year old young lady. In the course of this last year, there has been many attempts, unhinged attempts, to turn the English language on its head, and well, here's a striking example. We could go on. The top of the Sky News live page today was 4 teenage IDF soldiers killed as Hezbollah attacks. They did another tweet. It reads, breaking, the UK has announced sanctions against several Iranian senior military figures and organisations following Iran's multiple rocket attack on Israel on the 1st of October. You then see a scene of total destruction, silhouettes of people in front of the remnants of a building consumed with flames. What was that? It was the attack on the hospital by Israel, a Palestinian hospital. So they describe this attack on Israel by Iran, and then you see the image as though that's Iran's attack on Israel, when it's Israel's attack on Gaza. Sky News coverage continued to behave like this throughout the day.
A Hezbollah drone was able to evade air defences and strike a military base. At least 60 others were injured in the attack in Binyamina. Today, those killed have been named. They were Sergeant Omri Tamari, Sergeant Yosef Haib, Sergeant Yoav Agmon, and Sergeant Elon Amite. All 19 years old were killed in the drone attack.
There isn't even the pretense here that Palestinian life has any meaningful value. The life of a Palestinian civilian is treated as having far less value than an Israeli soldier. That includes Palestinian children being bombed and burned alive in a hospital while attached to IV drips. I would also note that last week, the United Nations released a detailed report which declared Israel had deliberately destroyed Gaza's healthcare system as part of a policy of extermination. If we had a functioning media, the latest attack on the hospital would be reported by broadcasters and military outlets in that context. Clearly, it's not just media complicity we need to talk about. Today, David Lammy, British Foreign Secretary, announced, despite repeated warnings, the dangerous actions of Iran and its proxies are driving further escalation in the Middle East. Following its ballistic missile attack on Israel, we are holding Iran to account and exposing those who facilitated these acts. He then quote tweets a post by the Foreign Office, or as part of his post, he quote tweets a post by the Foreign Office, which in big yellow underlined capital states sanction, then also in big bold letters, senior Iranian military figures and organisations. Now, I am on team don't bomb people, and I oppose all military escalations. What matters in what I say here is the different standards applied and the action that Britain is prepared to take when it so wishes. It is a fact that the Iranian ballistic missile attack was aimed at Israeli military targets. No serious analyst doubts that. It is a fact that that attack did not kill a single Israeli civilian. But in this case, Britain imposes sweeping sanctions on Iranian officials and organisations. On the other hand, Israel has wiped Gaza from the face of the earth and perpetrated hideous war crimes from the West Bank and now indeed Lebanon. It has slaughtered tens of thousands of innocent people, many of them children, including just last night and this morning in a hospital and a school. It has even killed British civilians, notably in the attack on the World Central Kitchen earlier this year. 3 Brits killed. But there are no sweeping sanctions imposed on Israel. Britain has simply suspended 8% of its weapons to Israel and has frankly bent over backwards apologising for doing so, making clear it was essentially forced to, against its will, by legal advice, while continuing, for example, to provide crucial components for F-35 jets, raining death and destruction on innocent civilians. We know Britain could impose sweeping sanctions against Israel for its grievous atrocities in the way it has against Iran. It chooses not to. That is complicity in genocide. Right now, and I'll be doing much more work on that this week, the Israeli state is executing a plan to destroy northern Gaza, with all food and essentials of life blocked from entry in a total siege. Nothing has entered since October began, with demands that civilians leave, with those remain treated as military targets to be targeted and killed. That is a grotesque war crime in full public view, and I would note the vast majority of this exhausted, starving population are not going to move, having endured so many forced displacements already with no safe passage there. Civilians trying to flee the south have been repeatedly murdered, clearly as part of a plan to ethnically cleanse the population and annex Gaza. Look, every day I feel burning rage about all this. I am painfully aware that I'm a white guy from Stockport. The rage felt by so many others, I'm going to be clear about this, will have brutal consequences felt for decades. This is the sowing, and my word, a bitter harvest will be reaped. I'm not saying that because I relish it. Death and destruction. There are lots of prominent people who clearly relish that. I'm not one of them. I don't want any innocent people to be killed. It is those who have facilitated, in full public view, some of the worst crimes of our age, who have made that inevitable over and over again. And as someone who has worked in the Western media for 13 years, there are no words in the English language that adequately convey what I think about that industry. It is an industry which made this genocide possible. Without media complicity, this genocide wouldn't have been possible. And the Western media has to be held to account for their role in one of the worst crimes of our age, because otherwise these horrors will never, ever end. Please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts and your comments. Help us take on the pro-genocide media at patreon.com/OMJones84. Listen to the podcast. I'll speak to you soon.